So for the first time in a couple of years, he was missing from the segment last week, but he's back in this week's review of International Week that was. Trump's first 100 days is on Earl Moxham's recap today, senior journalist with the Gleaner RJR Communications Group, or is it the RJR Gleaner Communications Group? Morning, friend.
Good morning.
Hope you had a great weekend. 100 days
yes.
of the presidency of Donald Trump.
Never thought we would be saying that.
Can you imagine? What's up with Sir Donald? How good he was or how bad was he?
Well, to use one of his own terms, by some measurements, he would have been, he was a disaster. But he has proclaimed it to be the most successful in the history of the presidency.
I think was the word he
yes.
used.
Well, objectively, some of his promises he was able to accomplish because those things that are in the gift, the sole gift of the presidency or the president, he was able to just sign these many executive orders, some of them more meaningful than others. But he took particular delight in reversing those executive orders that Obama had signed. And sometimes it had nothing really to do with the merit or the lack thereof in an Obama initiative.
He just did it because
as long as it was something that Obama
did. Right.
At the start of his presidency, when he was elected, I made a particular point that the sort of shift that you might see from one president to the other, perhaps the closest historical analogy that I could draw was that of the shift from Abraham Lincoln to his successor, Andrew Johnson, in 1865. And I say that before the fact that Johnson, though he was part of Abraham Lincoln's team, he was his vice president, that was a compromise. They were from different parties and they needed to patch together a coalition to win the Civil War, win that fight in terms of the division of the states. Now, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, shortly before he was assassinated, in January of 1865, he signed a very important executive order, which gave the newly freed black people of America, the ex-slaves, the right to 40 acres of land each. You would have heard of the much talked about 40 acres and a mule. It didn't include the mule initially. That wasn't part of the order, but some of them actually got a mule as well to take part in what they were doing. Johnson, shortly after he became president, rescinded that executive order. And I make that point because it had such a fundamental impact on the fortunes of black Americans in the subsequent decades and century. Trump has gone after some of the more important executive orders that Obama signed, out of nothing more than spite in some instances.
For sure. But he did a couple of things that some people think were good things in the 100 days.
Well, remember, he has his supporting cast on the right. There was one thing which he promised to do, which was relatively easy in terms of getting this new justice on the Supreme Court bench, because, of course, Obama's choice, Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, was blocked at every turn by the Republicans, and they have the majority so it was easy to get Merrick Garland confirmed.
Okay. What's happening in Tanzania?
It's an interesting situation with the new president. You may recall last year, I think when he came to power, he was very high profile in his decision he turned up at government offices to see who was working or not working and what they were doing, etc. And he promised to fire people who were not suitable for the job, etc. What he has done subsequent to that is that he has apparently discovered a significant racket in employment practices in the public sector. Many people, thousands of people, in this instance, about 10,000 people have been dismissed from their jobs because it appears that they had been hired with fraudulent certificates. So they had certificates saying,
from school and
which school they went to, what accomplishments they had, and it turned out not to be true. Remember, however, that you're talking about a public service, a public sector of more than 400,000 people. So the 10,000 who have been dismissed or about to be dismissed in this instance is a minuscule percentage in terms of the total number. So I suspect they'll continue to go through and see, if there are others. But apparently, it's quite, the level of fraud in this, in terms of hiring in Tanzania is at an industrial scale.
Yeah, they say it's very common for people to use fake certificates.
Yes.
In every sphere.
Which could be particularly dangerous in respect of certain jobs.
Yeah.
You could have certain jobs in which people's health, for example, relies on the authenticity of the work that is done by those who are hired to do those jobs.
We were talking before we came on that there are protests all over the place, and sometimes you miss some of these protests, but there's a huge one going on in Brazil.
There's been a huge one going on in Brazil, people protesting against some of the actions of the president who replaced Dilma Rousseff. Now, this president has until next year in terms of completing that term of office.
He was the vice president?
He was, I think, the vice president.
Yeah.
He's not particularly popular with the people, but he has sufficient support in Congress to get through some of his measures. And one of them is pension reform. Now, pension reform, let's not kid ourselves, it's very important across the world. Many pension funds are in danger of running out, for example, if reforms are not implemented. And we have had these discussions here in Jamaica as well. In the case of Brazil, among the measures he has been pursuing is to raise, I think, the age of retirement, and among other things, and to reduce some benefits, I believe. And that has resulted in the kinds of protests that we have been seeing. Buses have been torched, and quite a bit has been happening. The situation in Brazil in recent years is in stark contrast to the robust state of the economy, or the perception that it was doing so well a few years ago. And then, of course, they had these two major, mega sporting events, the Olympics and the World Cup football. And they have not turned out to be the kinds of successes that had been anticipated. And you would know that across the world, many instances in which people take on, they spend all of this money and do all of this lobbying to get these major sporting events. And they are left with white elephants in terms of some of the facilities built, etc.
Yeah. Some people think our stadium in Trelawney is one like that.
The question is, can we transform it into something that can be meaningful? Because we do need more sporting facilities. Many question whether it was placed at the right location, but it is there. What do you do with it going forward? But you're right.
And in Brazil, they said some of the stadiums are car parks now for buses and stuff like that. So a couple of them are just not doing well.
So while it's important to keep our eyes on the situation in Venezuela, but we also have to look across at Brazil and other places. Back to the Trump thing very quickly. The fact that, he has raised tensions with North Korea, for example, is something to look at. The North Korean situation definitely needs to be addressed. As to what is the right way of going about it, that's another question. Trump is not known for patience, and so one has to be very careful. He's working with the Chinese on it. Is important because China has some influence with North Korea. And he has had to back down, by the way, on some of his promises in respect of China, for example, to label China a currency manipulator because he now needs China to help him to allay the situation in North Korea. And by the way, this question of pulling out of NAFTA, that's no longer on the table.
And it seems in a very realistic way that we could have a little war if Kim Jong-un and
that's not likely to be a little war. That's the problem.
All right, my friend, have a great week.
Indeed.
All right, folks, International Week that was. All right, so we still have an auto lesson for women and reducing acid in the body. But we take a break now and SMAP. Soon come back.